Battlefield 6 might have actually shipped a year early, quite literally on purpose. Apparently, that's something that EA decided to do. It is one of the theories going around right now based on a bunch of data mining. It would absolutely explain almost everything about this game's very bizarre first year. Now, we've all heard versions of the same story. Major new multiplayer game launches. It is hyped beyond belief. Initially, it seems to deliver. And then the cracks start. It doesn't keep delivering for everyone. Then bugs and friction start to erode player trust. The expected drop-off of numbers whenever casual people go away feels larger than it otherwise should have been, and the game gets cast as being in terminal decline. You know, the kind you can't pull out of. But somehow, I'm here to say that Battlefield 6 seems to be surviving. Because we've had 2 seasons now of well-received maps, well-liked mechanic updates, and quite a bit more. The game's 4th season's about to start, the devs are promising at least 2 more years of content, and if the Hopium rumor mill comes out true and there is a Cliffs of Dover map in the future, yes, I think my head would explode. But regardless of that, this game's future looks brighter than ever from an actual gameplay perspective, but you'd hardly think it, given that their team started this year with player frustration at an all-time high and with layoffs stripping them of valuable colleagues and, of course, a tragedy robbing them of their leader. I'll open with a quote from our good friends, the Electronic Artists. "The best performing Battlefield in a fiscal year, setting numerous franchise fiscal year records." Who doesn't love a fiscal year record? Of course, that does ring a little bit weird because dropping player numbers, frustration over a delayed Season 2, and all of that stuff really made the game seem like it was in pretty dire straits. It was rough for us players even as EA's own end-of-year financials were hyping the game up massively. Now, of course, the good results EA were happy with were probably helped by EA leadership laying off staff across all 4 Battlefield teams in a realignment, which happened back in March of this year. Of course, if you're a big corporation, record results become even more record-worthy once they're made more profitable. Of course, there are fewer staff to pay, fewer fixed costs. But at the time, you wouldn't know any of that based on the way players were talking about the game. And that's because financial success came at a tough time for Battlefield 6. Now, our last video covered those player frustrations. People felt that the first season was thin in content. They felt ignored by the devs, and they were furious at how slow the updates seemed to come. And it was weird. Battlefield 6's launch was genuinely huge, and it came in a weak year for Call of Duty. But the live service just didn't live up to it. And of course, if you remember the likes of Battlefield 5, you'll know that a Battlefield live service isn't always the most reliable thing. And as it turns out, there might be a reason for that. Off Record Gaming's data miners reckon, from internal file names and from some industry whisperings, that Battlefield 6 was actually built to launch in 2026, meaning it would have had another year in the oven. But as the story goes, Grand Theft Auto then slipped, Call of Duty had a stumble, and apparently EA saw an open window. They decided that that's when they were going to launch. But to be sure, there's one public statement that does look a little bit funny, because Andrew Wilson, EA CEO, told investors the launch window was, quote, clearer than it was before. He wouldn't name Grand Theft Auto, he didn't have to. Now, of course, this data mining stuff is something we can't necessarily verify, but we do know from Ars Technica's reporting that the campaign for this game was rebuilt from scratch after EA shut down Ridgeline Games. This was seemingly all on the same deadline, and it was with insiders warning that parts of the single player might actually have to be cut just to get the game shipped on time. And as someone who played the campaign of that game, yeah, that certainly does fit. Now, from that point, the friction kept building, even as player numbers dropped to about 20% of their staggering peaks. And even though some of its weaker numbers still had it in the Steam top 10, players were often buying into a narrative that pitted them against Battlefield Studios. What Battlefield Studios have done in response, and seem to actually pull off, is to change that narrative. Then came the roadmap, and it wasn't what anyone had expected. You see, up until then, the pattern basically went like this. As one season ended, the next season would get teased. But instead, Battlefield just showed us everything that they've been working on right through to the end of the year. And what that meant was that Season 3 would be remasters of brilliant maps from Battlefield 3 and 4, and then Season 4 would bring a whole new map, a massively sized one, and Wake Island. later on in Season 4. And even cooler, both of these maps are bringing back the naval warfare that's been missing since Battlefield 1. There's a bunch more in Season 4, but this isn't a deep dive video on that season, because we got more to cover. Season 5 is going to end the year with 3 maps, and in addition to that, reworks for Sobek and Blackwell, which could be pretty huge. Some of us have strong feelings about those maps. Let's just put it that way. The next big win then is timelines. They've been cut down hard. We've went from a 3-month season at the start to now 10 weeks, and really with no horrible pressure on your rate of progression. Basically, you get at least 2 maps every 2.5 months, and by the 1-year mark, that will have Battlefield 6 going toe-to-toe with Battlefield 3, 4, and 1 on their map counts. But while maps might be the king of content in Battlefield, they were not the only things put on offer. Custom lobbies are coming in Season 4, and across the year, they're working through a lot of fan requests. There is to be a fully fledged server browser, platoons, reworks, and even brand new features like proximity chat, which I believe will be entering testing reasonably soon. And a more recent Q&A doubled down on all of that. They basically told us exactly when to expect each feature, they guaranteed map tests as well in Battlefield Labs, and they basically kept telling people that, hey, you're being heard. And you know what? It does actually feel like we're being heard. And certainly, as marketing goes, it has won over a lot of doubters. But obviously, this is all just good marketing. Marketing only gets you so far, and if the product you're selling doesn't match the promises, then all you'll do is break people's hearts and make them apathetic about your franchise. Well, not immediately, because anger tends to happen before the apathy sets in. And really, the narrative around Battlefield 6's launch is a near-perfect example of this. But fortunately, as Season 3 has rolled out, I think worries about quality have fallen away. That's not to say that the game has been perfect. You will see lots of wins and losses if you go and look through the individual Battlefield specialist YouTubers, but the point of today's video is we need to look at the big picture and see what actually works. So Season 3 Part 1 answered a lot of people's biggest complaints, and it did that by including the biggest map in the game yet. And while it's true the map is a remake rather than being wholly new, I'd say it really is a remake. It's been reworked enough that it feels very fresh to play rather than just being a rehash. Then there's vehicle updates, which overhauled a core pillar of how the game plays, wider changes to weapons, recoil, gadgets, polished stuff across the board. It was a strong showing. Now by the time the second half rolled around, players knew what to expect from Cairo Bazaar. It's a solid remake with new destruction tech to really make the map sing, but on top of that, they also got pain points on older maps fixed. Things like flight areas, helicopter reworks, and the death of the hated orange dots, plus big changes to visibility in the game. And it's all had the effect that even the third and final beat of Season 3 actually felt like a big deal whenever it dropped. And personally, I've got to say this is the stickiest that Battlefield has really felt to me since playing Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4. I'm loving it. The content cadence is solid, it seems to be getting more solid, and I've caught myself being way more retained than I expected to be. I'm about 250 hours in the game now, and most of those have came in the last few months. And really, that's because there was a lot in the details that I didn't expect. Things beyond just a new map, so the likes of reworked attachments, newer attachments, the quicker unlock speeds, and just way better build variety. Those things have made this game far more engaging and more fun to progress in, and it's really that last one that just keeps pulling me back. And here's the funny thing about it all. Season 3 wasn't that different to Season 2 overall. It was an evolution of what came before. More content, more fixes, really all the stuff the community kept asking for. It was faster, it was mostly bug-free, but it basically did prove that Battlefield Studios hadn't just got lucky with the new maps happening to be good. We saw that they could deliver changes that people wanted fairly consistently, and even if they don't always get everything right, you do actually see a strong iterative process. And in the world of live service, it's getting that learning curve down and those iterations in that really counts the most. And I'd say it ultimately came down to one fairly simple thing. They needed time to build all of this, and I don't literally mean the content. They needed to build the team that updates the content, to structure the various studios not based on the plan that they intended, that they would have ideally had, that they put in a big spreadsheet post-launch, but, you know, the actual game, the revealed requirements of live service development for the Battlefield 6 that they've actually got. And to help us get a read in the timelines, here's a quote. So a season starts maybe a year before. That's a quote from Ariel Giovanetti, seasonal content and competitive creative lead at EA Motive. It was an interview to IGN that was about building Season 3. Work had actually began well before launch, but we did already sort of know that. As an example, platoons are a feature that have been showing up in playtest data since March. Isolated was a map that we heard about back in April before Season 3 launched. But data miners like Temporeal have confirmed that it was actually the codename for Season 4's Suru Reef. Now early on, it looked like that map would land in Season 3. Of course, it didn't end up doing that. I don't know how those reworks came to be, but man, those reworks ended up being really good, and hey, I'm glad this map's coming in Season 4. Now the point of that detour is that a lot of what they've built for the live service was always part of the plan, mapped out well before the game even ships. If the theory holds, then that's basically the missing year, and everything we're watching now is Battlefield 6 catching up to a release date that it was perhaps always built for, at least according to the rumor mill that I referenced at the very start of this video. Now, the point of this isn't that they always had a perfect plan and that we were just impatient. They clearly are responding to player demands. Season 3 has let the balance team basically rebuild the game's recoil systems and vehicle gameplay. They're just doing a lot of finessing and adjusting as the players who actually stuck with the game basically tell them what they want from the game. And on the topic of maps, getting Goldmond Railway and Cairo Bazaar out quickly basically seems to have let them put more time into getting naval warfare where players will likely want it. Remakes and remasters are good if the map is good, and they're even better when they buy time. A whole extra season by the look of it. They still do take a lot of work though, especially with all the changes made to teams, to like map flow, to destruction, all those things on those maps. But they do still start from a proven base. There's less risk in that, and there's less new art direction to be done in that. Maybe less assets. But all this does risk some heroes going unsung, and that's because of Battlefield Labs. Labs testing has not let up this year. It has been constant. Now, the team aren't always delivering changes immediately, but obviously, with Battlefield Labs, with the amount of testing that's going on there, and of course all the players who basically donate their time to that, it's clear that they are getting better at learning what their game needs to be and what direction it needs to go in. Of course, now we have all those benefits on top of a rhythm of content drops with fewer bugs that does actually seem to be working. Of course, there are still some bugs, there's never zero bugs, and if Naval Warfare comes out bug-free, well, I'd be very surprised. All of that sounded good, but people's question is still going to be, but it's a live service, decline is decline. For Battlefield 6, that's clearly not the case. The decline has actually leveled off. The fall from a launch peak of nearly 750,000 was brutal, but let's be realistic, there is no way that Battlefield was ever going to be holding numbers that high for any significant amount of time. What we see, and what's important, is the monthly drop has kept shrinking. Now, the game hasn't rebounded into massively higher player numbers than some of these lows, but I think some of that is because the big lesson for game development studios and publishers is you need to put in the hard work first. It can't only be marketing. There needs to be a period where your numbers haven't jumped up yet, but the quality and retention of the game that is there has jumped up massively. It's only once that condition has been met that true large positive growth can even happen again. And what's crazy to me about this story is the story. This game was running layoffs despite EA talking about record-breaking success. A lot of people did lose their jobs at Battlefield Studios after the launch of this game. Now, partially that's EA leadership doing what they always do, you know? But here's what we need to keep in mind. Things like this are all about scale. A live game built this big is brutally expensive to keep running, and EA's answer to that problem was obviously fewer people. And in great part, the happy times we're experiencing now were paid for by the people who lost their jobs. That's literally true in terms of their work, but it's also true in terms of EA's brutal calculus. They could likely only justify keeping Battlefield a live service by getting some of those costs down. And it's likely only because of that they could afford to take the time to actually rebuild their plans and rebuild them right, to shuffle around resources so that maps and, of course, the systems that people actually want are in front of players earlier than perhaps the initial data mining suggested. And what all that led to is two things. Them being able to say, hey, we can do a big roadmap, here's the roadmap, it has way more maps, and it's actually pretty damn quick. And then, of course, the launch of Season 4 itself. Bottom line, Battlefield Studios, they had a hard time, but they ended up actually having time. Time to rework their plans around the complaints that players had from day one. Time to move delivery dates to make that happen. And I think that's what really sets Battlefield Studios apart from the other live services we've often covered in this channel, where they could actually try to pull out of the nosedive that they found themselves in. Few teams in the games industry get that chance. Not everyone gets to go and tell Indy 100 that they're planning at least 2 more years of content in a way that'll even sound credible. And the funny thing about all this is it's not the first time they've tried something like this. They did try similar with Battlefield 2042 later on into its life. It actually ended up having way more of a life than anybody expected. And while they obviously never recovered that game and never really got it to a place where it could be super big and successful, it's clear that lessons learned from that have been carried forward and applied to Battlefield 6 successfully. Where we're left then is genuinely promising. This is their opportunity to actually get this game back where it deserves, to actually get the player numbers properly up. The only way to do that is, of course, to do the work. Right now, that's meant balancing player feedback against their own plans, and in doing that, they've managed to stabilize the live service, and they've met even the most hardcore fan demands in many cases. Now, they're never going to make anyone happy. The Steam reviews probably won't climb back up to positive, not for a long while anyway, and after decades of Battlefield games, everyone has a favorite feature or a favorite map that'll never make it to 6. Maybe I won't get Strike at Karkand. Sad, but I'll just have to get over it, and the big picture is what actually matters here. It's working, it's a good plan. Providing EA doesn't decide it would rather go and build a new game and squander all of this hard work, well, what we've actually got now is a title that everyone had written off, that is still here, that is pulled out of its decline, that is getting better and better, and that has a real shot at lasting. Most live games never get that far. I'm impressed with what they've pulled off. I hope the numbers come, because I actually think Battlefield 6 deserves them. But while all's going well here, turns out Steam is being sucked into and consumed by a black hole that is engulfing gaming as we know it and growing around what you and I even know as gaming. To understand what's going on there, watch this video next.